May 1945. Berlin lay in ruins, Hitler was dead, and Britain had won the bloodiest war in history. Yet victory presented an impossible question. How do you transform a nation of 70 million people, indoctrinated for 12 years, into a functioning democracy? The answer came not from Churchill's grand speeches or elaborate Allied plans, but from something absurdly British: afternoon tea with the enemy. What happened in that room would rewrite the blueprint for post-war Europe. The stench hit Major Arthur Pemberton before he saw the city. Smoke, cordite and decay mingled with morning fog as his staff car navigated Berlin's shattered streets on 15th May 1945, 07:23, precisely. Entire blocks had been erased. What remained stood like broken teeth against grey sky. Temperature hovered near freezing despite late spring. Rain drummed steadily on the vehicle's roof, turning rubble-choked roads into rivers of ash-grey slurry. Pemberton was 38, grammar school educated, a solicitor from Manchester who'd spent 4 years translating captured German documents. Now, British military government had given him an assignment that made no rational sense: establish democratic institutions in a nation where democracy had died spectacularly just 12 years prior. The statistics were damning. By May 1945, Nazi Party membership exceeded 8 million. Hitler Youth had enrolled every child over 10. 12 years of propaganda, warfare, and totalitarianism had created a population that had forgotten what democracy meant, if they'd ever known it at all. The briefing from command had been brutally frank. Conventional approaches were failing catastrophically. The Americans were arresting every former party member, creating administrative paralysis. The French were focused purely on punishment. The Soviets were installing their own authoritarian system. Britain needed something different, but nobody could articulate what that meant. Find people who understand administration but aren't ideologically poisoned, they'd said. As if such people existed in a nation where joining the party had been prerequisite for keeping your job, feeding your family, avoiding suspicion. Pemberton's background seemed almost comically inadequate for the task. He'd spent the war in requisitioned country houses, reading intercepted correspondence, not commanding troops or liberating camps. Yet his superiors had noted something useful. Pemberton asked questions. He didn't simply classify Germans as Nazis or victims. He understood that human beings made calculations under pressure, that joining a party didn't automatically make someone a fanatic, that administrative competence existed independently of political ideology. The moment that made his appointment inevitable occurred during a routine document review in March 1945. Pemberton had been reading intercepted letters from German local administrators. Amidst the propaganda and loyal declarations, he'd found something peculiar: complaint, civil servants grumbling about party interference, factory managers frustrated by ideologically driven inefficiency, military logistics officers criticizing SS incompetence. These weren't resistors or saboteurs. They were bureaucrats irritated that fanaticism made their jobs harder. Pemberton had written a memo. If we want to rebuild Germany, we need people who remember how things actually worked before ideology broke everything. His superiors had dismissed it initially. Then the occupation began, and reality hit. American zones were drowning in detained suspects. French zones couldn't find anyone to run basic services. Soviet zones were functional only because Moscow had installed its own people. Britain's zone was heading toward chaos. The memo was retrieved. Pemberton received new orders: go to Berlin, find competent Germans who could build democracy somehow. The staff car stopped outside a requisitioned building that had once housed Wehrmacht administration. Rain streamed down shattered windows. Inside, British military police guarded corridors where captured German officers awaited processing. Pemberton's briefing identified 3,000 detained officers in British custody, ranging from generals to lieutenants. Somewhere in that mass might be individuals with administrative skills, local respect, and crucially, enough intelligence to understand that their old system had destroyed itself. The problem was time. Food shortages were worsening daily. Infrastructure repair required coordination. Local governance couldn't wait for perfect solutions. Britain needed Germans running German affairs within weeks, not months, but releasing the wrong people would create immediate political catastrophe. Parliament was demanding accountability. British public wanted retribution. Churchill himself had emphasized that Britain would not repeat Versailles' mistakes, but neither would it tolerate Nazi remnants. Pemberton requested a specific file that morning. General Otto Schreiber, aged 56, career military administrator, former district commander in Lower Saxony. Schreiber had joined the party in 1933, mandatory for his position. He'd overseen logistics, infrastructure, civil coordination. Intelligence reports noted no war crimes, no SS affiliation, no ideological fanaticism. His military record was efficient but conventional. He'd surrendered his command intact when British forces arrived, ordered his troops to disarm peacefully, prevented civilian casualties. More significantly, intercepted correspondence showed Schreiber had maintained relationships with pre-Nazi-era Social Democrats, had protected Jewish business associates until forced deportations made it impossible, had quietly ignored Hitler Youth recruitment quotas. None of this made Schreiber innocent. Party membership implicated everyone. But Pemberton saw possibility. This was someone who understood administration, remembered Weimar democracy, possessed local credibility, and critically had demonstrated capacity for pragmatic decision-making over ideological purity. If Germany was to be rebuilt, it needed thousands like him. The question was whether such men could be trusted, whether they'd learned anything from catastrophe, whether Britain could build democracy using people who'd enabled its destruction. Pemberton stubbed out his cigarette and walked into the detention facility. The corridor smelled of damp concrete and boiled cabbage. Rain drummed against the roof. Somewhere in this building sat a German general who might hold answers, or might simply be another accomplished liar. Either way, Pemberton would find out. Britain's occupation strategy depended on getting this right. The interrogation room measured 4 meters square, with walls the color of old dishwater. Single bulb dangling from ceiling, table, 3 chairs, filing cabinet, nothing else. Rain drummed steadily against barred window overlooking courtyard where German prisoners exercised under British guard. Temperature barely above freezing despite it being May. Pemberton could see his breath. The building's heating system had been destroyed weeks ago, coal stocks exhausted, repair materials non-existent. General Otto Schreiber entered at 08:15, escorted by 2 military police. He was tall, thin, greying hair cropped short, Wehrmacht uniform stripped of insignia. His face carried exhaustion deeper than mere sleeplessness. This was fatigue earned through watching your nation destroy itself, whilst being unable or unwilling to stop it. He saluted automatically, then caught himself. Old habits. The war was over. Pemberton gestured to the chair. No preamble. General Schreiber, I'm Major Pemberton, British military government. I'm here to determine whether you're a fanatic or an administrator. You have one conversation to convince me. Schreiber sat carefully. When he spoke, his English carried slight accent but precise grammar. Major, I am both and neither. The Reich made that distinction meaningless. Interesting answer. Not denial, not justification. Acknowledgement of complicity. Pemberton opened the file. You joined the party in 1933. District commander by 1938. Oversaw logistics for Wehrmacht operations from 1940 onwards. That makes you guilty of enabling everything that followed. Yes. No hesitation. Schreiber's hands remained flat on the table, weathered, steady. I told myself I was preserving order, maintaining infrastructure, protecting civilians from worse alternatives, standard rationalizations of the complicit functionary. Yet intelligence reports you maintained contact with Social Democrats, protected some Jewish associates, ignored recruitment quotas. Pemberton watched carefully for reaction. I did what I could within impossible constraints. It was pathetically insufficient. Schreiber's voice was flat, factual. I saved perhaps 20 families. Thousands more died whilst I filled out paperwork efficiently. If you're offering me absolution, I'm not interested. If you're offering me punishment, I accept it. If you're offering me something else, then explain. Pemberton leaned back. The chair creaked. Outside, prisoners shouted orders during morning exercise, maintaining military routine even in defeat. Britain needs to rebuild Germany. We cannot do it alone. We need Germans who understand administration, who remember democracy, who won't recreate what just collapsed. The problem is finding such people in a nation where everyone is complicit. Then you have an impossible task. Schreiber met his eyes directly. Major, Germany hasn't forgotten democracy. Germany never truly understood it. Weimar failed, not because Hitler destroyed it from outside, but because we never properly built it inside. Democracy requires trust in institutions, compromise between factions, acceptance of uncertainty. Germany in 1918 had none of those. We wanted order, clarity, hierarchy. When democracy delivered chaos, we chose the man who promised certainty. Pemberton pulled out his notebook. This was worth recording. You're saying Germans are incapable of democracy. No, I'm saying we must learn it. And learning requires time, patience, and most importantly, examples of it actually working. Lectures won't suffice. Parliamentary procedures won't suffice. You must demonstrate that democratic systems deliver better outcomes than what we had. That requires functioning local government, reliable infrastructure, fair dispute resolution, transparent administration. All the boring machinery that makes democracy real rather than rhetorical. And you believe you could help build this? Pemberton's tone was skeptical. Schreiber paused. Rain intensified outside. Major, I spent 12 years watching ideological fanaticism destroy competent administration. Party members with no engineering knowledge overruling factory managers, SS officers with no supply training dictating logistics, propaganda replacing practical planning. The result was catastrophic inefficiency hidden beneath triumphant speeches. If you want Germans to embrace democracy, show them it works better. Deliver their post reliably, repair roads efficiently, resolve disputes fairly. Demonstrate that systems based on competence rather than loyalty produce superior results. Pemberton considered this. The analysis matched his own observations. Britain's occupation faced immediate crises. Food distribution networks collapsed, infrastructure damaged beyond immediate repair, civilian administration non-existent. The population was exhausted, traumatized, suspicious. They needed proof that peace meant improvement, not merely different occupiers. What would you need to make this work? Authority to act, resources to allocate, protection from both retribution and party remnants, and most critically, time to build trust. Schreiber ticked points off methodically. Local governance cannot be imposed from above. It must emerge from communities recognizing that new systems serve their interests. That requires administrators they trust, solving problems they care about, demonstrably better than what they had. You're describing a years-long process. Britain needs results in weeks. Then Britain will fail. Schreiber's voice carried no satisfaction, merely certainty. Major, you cannot rush trust. You cannot decree democracy. You can demonstrate it works consistently until people begin believing it. There are no shortcuts. The conversation continued through morning. Pemberton probed weaknesses, tested contradictions, searched for ideology hidden beneath pragmatic language. Schreiber remained consistent, acknowledgement of guilt, rejection of Nazi ideology, emphasis on practical demonstration over theoretical persuasion. By 11:30, Pemberton had made a decision that would have horrified Parliament but matched operational necessity. This was someone who could help rebuild, if given chance. The question was whether London would accept it. Britain couldn't officially employ former Nazi Party members. Public opinion demanded accountability. Yet operational reality required competent Germans immediately. Pemberton needed approval for an approach that was strategically sound, but politically toxic. He drafted a telegram marked urgent. The response would determine whether Britain's occupation succeeded or collapsed into the same chaos afflicting other zones. The telegram from London arrived 19th May 1945, 1407, marked most secret. Pemberton read it twice, disbelieving. Permission granted for experimental program utilizing carefully vetted former German administrators. Conditions were strict. Continuous British supervision, public accountability measures, immediate dismissal if evidence of continuing Nazi sympathy emerged. Most significantly, absolute secrecy regarding the policy. Parliament couldn't know. Press couldn't know. Even other Allied zones couldn't know. Britain was gambling that results would justify methods nobody could officially acknowledge. Pemberton established his headquarters in Bad Oeynhausen, a spa town miraculously intact, requisitioned as British occupation centre. By June 1945, he'd assembled his team, 23 German administrators carefully selected, former Social Democrats where possible, but pragmatically including party members whose records showed administrative competence rather than ideological enthusiasm. Schreiber became his primary liaison, translating British directives into German bureaucratic reality. The approach contradicted everything other zones were doing. Americans were arresting thousands, creating power vacuums. Soviets were installing Communist Party loyalists with no administrative experience. French were focused on extracting reparations. Britain's zone, quietly, was putting former enemy administrators back in positions of limited authority, supervised but functional. The gamble was enormous. If it failed, careers would end. If it succeeded, Britain might actually rebuild Germany, whilst others merely occupied it. The first test came in Hanover, July 1945. The city was devastated. Population swollen with refugees, food supplies critically short. British military could distribute rations, but lacked local knowledge for efficient allocation. Schreiber proposed establishing German-run distribution centres, supervised by British officers but operated by local administrators who understood neighbourhood dynamics. Pemberton approved it, knowing failure meant riots, success meant vindication. Results emerged within fortnight. Distribution became efficient, queues shortened. Black market activity decreased because legitimate systems worked. Most significantly, civilians began trusting that new administrations served their interests rather than ideological agenda. Word spread. Other cities requested similar systems. By August, British zone was stabilizing faster than anyone had projected. Intelligence reports from Soviet zone revealed confusion. Their administrators were loyal communists, but incompetent managers. Why was British zone functioning better despite using former enemy personnel? Soviet commanders suspected deception, assuming Britain was secretly maintaining Nazi structures. They couldn't comprehend that competence might exist independently of ideology, that Germans might cooperate with occupiers who respected administrative professionalism over political purity. American zone faced different problems. The denazification program was thorough but paralyzing. Anyone who joined the party was dismissed, creating gaps in essential services. Infrastructure repair stalled because engineers were detained. Schools remained closed because teachers were under investigation. American commanders were ideologically correct but operationally hamstrung. Reports reached Washington questioning whether thoroughness was becoming counterproductive. French zone extracted resources efficiently, but built nothing sustainable. Their occupation was transparently punitive, focused on weakening Germany permanently. French administrators made no pretense of rebuilding German capacity. The result was functional extraction, but zero foundation for future governance. Britain's approach was creating something unexpected. Germans were learning democracy by practicing it under supervision. Local councils were re-established with elected representatives, but British officers retained veto power. Disputes were resolved through transparent procedures, with decisions publicly justified. Infrastructure projects were prioritized through community consultation rather than arbitrary decree. None of this was perfect democracy, but it was democratic process, demonstrably delivering results. Schreiber observed the evolution with careful attention. In October 1945, during routine meeting, he told Pemberton, "Major, you've done something remarkable. You've made democracy boring. That's essential. Germans embraced fascism because it was dramatic, decisive, clarifying. You're teaching us that good governance is methodical, gradual, undramatic. Systems working quietly, problems solved through procedure rather than through heroes. Is that sufficient?" Pemberton remained cautious. 6 months of success could be undone by single failure. No, but its foundation. Schreiber gestured at reports covering the desk. These statistics show improving food security, declining crime, increasing infrastructure functionality. Germans are noticing their lives are improving under democratic administration. That builds trust more effectively than any propaganda. When Soviet zone residents see British zone prospering, they question their own system. When American zone residents see British zone functioning, they question their denazification program. You're winning through demonstration rather than declaration. By December 1945, British zone had become anomaly. Other allies were requesting observers, trying to understand how Britain was achieving better results with fewer resources. The answer remained officially secret. Britain was pragmatically employing former enemy administrators, betting that competence plus supervision produced better outcomes than ideological purity plus chaos. The gamble was working, but sustainability remained uncertain. Rebuilding Germany would take years, perhaps decades. Could this experimental approach survive political scrutiny once secrecy ended? The truth emerged slowly, then unstoppably. By 1947, British zone's success was undeniable. Food production exceeded other zones. Infrastructure repair outpaced projections. Crime rates were lowest among Allied sectors. Most significantly, Germans in British zone were actively participating in local governance, not merely accepting occupation, but engaging with democratic institutions as their own. Parliamentary questions began in London. How was British zone succeeding where others struggled? Initial responses were vague. Efficient administration, careful planning, British pragmatism. But journalists investigated. By autumn 1947, truth leaked. Britain had been employing former party members, carefully vetted, supervised closely, but undeniably complicit in the regime Britain had fought to destroy. The scandal should have been devastating. Opposition MPs demanded explanations. Newspapers ran exposés. Pemberton was recalled to London to testify before closed parliamentary committee. He brought statistics, comparative governance outcomes across all Allied zones, economic recovery rates, German civilian satisfaction surveys, infrastructure restoration timelines. The data was irrefutable. British zone was succeeding because Britain had prioritized results over ideological consistency. Schreiber's role became public knowledge. Former Wehrmacht general, party member since 1933, now principal German liaison for British occupation. Critics called it collaboration with Nazis. Supporters called it practical necessity. The debate consumed British politics through winter 1947 to 1948. Resolution came from unexpected source, Germans themselves. In March 1948, British zone held municipal elections, first since war's end. Democratic procedures were scrupulously followed, open nominations, transparent counting, international observers. Turnout reached 78%. The elected councils immediately requested continuation of British advisory system, specifically requesting Schreiber remain as liaison. German voters were endorsing the approach their liberators found controversial. Pemberton returned to Bad Oeynhausen in May 1948, his position secure, but his methods now transparent. He met Schreiber for tea, deliberately chosen symbolism. The gesture was quintessentially British, resolving tension through ritual civility. They sat in requisitioned villa overlooking gardens, slowly being restored to pre-war condition. Rain fell steadily, characteristically. "General, your former countrymen have vindicated your approach. How does that feel?" Pemberton poured tea with practiced precision. Schreiber accepted the cup carefully. "Relieved, Major, and uncertain. Democracy here remains fragile. We've learned procedures, but culture develops slowly. One crisis could undo everything if institutions prove weaker than we hope. Then we ensure institutions strengthen." Pemberton's tone carried determination that had characterized 4 years of occupation. "The Federal Republic will be established next year. Your generation of administrators will transition power to elected government. That's the ultimate test. Can democracy survive without British supervision? It must. Otherwise, we've merely created better occupation, not genuine self-governance." Schreiber set down his cup. "Major, what you initiated in 1945 succeeded because you treated Germans as capable of learning rather than as inherently authoritarian. That respect mattered more than you perhaps realize. We'd been told for 12 years that democracy was weakness. You demonstrated it was strength through boring competence." The conversation extended through afternoon. They discussed transition planning, institutional safeguards, educational reforms necessary to sustain democratic culture. By evening, framework was established for British withdrawal from direct governance whilst maintaining advisory presence. Democracy wouldn't be imposed or supervised indefinitely. It would be handed to Germans who'd learned to value it through experiencing its practical benefits. The Federal Republic of Germany was established 23 May 1949. Schreiber attended as observer, no official role. His generation was transitioning power to younger Germans who'd rebuilt their nation under Allied guidance. The first Bundestag convened in Bonn, not Berlin, symbolizing break from past. Parliamentary procedures were German-designed but British-influenced, committee systems, question time, transparent deliberation. Democracy that was methodical, boring, effective. Pemberton retired in 1950, returning to Manchester solicitor's practice. His experimental program became template for post-war reconstruction globally, though rarely acknowledged officially. Historians discovered his role decades later when classified files were released. The DAFT tea with enemy general had pioneered an approach that transformed occupation into partnership, punishment into rehabilitation, ideology into pragmatism. Schreiber lived until 1978, never holding elected office, but consulting quietly on administrative reforms. He gave single interview in 1975. Major Pemberton taught Germany that democracy isn't heroic, it's procedural, gradual, undramatic. We needed that lesson after 12 years of dramatic certainty. Britain gave us space to learn through practice rather than through lectures. That made all the difference. By 1980, West Germany was functioning democracy, economically prosperous, politically stable, culturally transformed. The foundation was laid in 1945, when British officer chose pragmatism over punishment, when German general chose reconstruction over resentment, when both sides recognized that rebuilding required former enemies working together towards shared future. The tea meeting that scandalized Parliament had demonstrated something profound. Democracy survives not through ideological purity, but through practical demonstration that it delivers better outcomes than alternatives. That lesson, learned in rain-soaked Bad Oeynhausen, became cornerstone of German democratic culture, proving that even catastrophic failure could become foundation for extraordinary success if approached with patience, pragmatism, and willingness to trust former enemies with supervised opportunity to rebuild what they'd helped destroy. Democracy wasn't won through grand gestures, but through tea, patience, and trusting competence over ideology. If this story of unlikely partnership resonated with you, subscribe to explore more untold histories that shaped our modern world. What other wartime decisions created today's reality? Share your thoughts in the comments below. History isn't just battles won or lost, it's the quiet conversations that rebuilt civilization from ruins. Let's discover them together.